Hey guys, today we are reading fairy tales. Last time we read The Ugly Duckling. Today we're reading Little Red Riding Hood. Let's get started. Once upon a time, there was a lovely girl who wore her favorite red hooded cape everywhere she went, even to bed. Her nickname was Little Red Riding Hood. One sunny summer afternoon, Little Red Riding Hood's mother sent her to take a get-well basket of chicken soup and crackers to her grandmother, who had a terrible cold. Her grandmother lived near her house in a little cabin in the woods. As Little Red Riding Hood set off into the forest, her mother cautioned her sternly, "Do not stray from the path, even to pick berries, and no matter what, don't talk to strangers. Call me as soon as you get there." Little Red Riding Hood dutifully obeyed her mother's instructions, stopping only to pick berries that lined the trail. As she stopped to pluck one especially large raspberry from its vine, she tripped on a root and fell flat on the ground. The berries she had collected were scattered all over the path, and her basket flipped over. "Oh dear!" cried Little Red Riding Hood as she scrambled to pick up her things. Just then a big bad wolf jumped out from behind the trees where he had been waiting for his next meal to come along. "Hello," said the wolf sweetly. "Can I help gather your berries?" "Well," said Little Red Riding Hood, "you look like a nice wolf, but I'm not allowed to talk to strangers." "I see," replied the wolf. "Then I won't say another word," and he began picking up the berries in silence. This seemed all right to Little Red Riding Hood. After all, her mother didn't say she couldn't gather berries with a stranger. It took some time, but finally everything was back in the basket. "My, it's getting late," the big bad wolf yawned. "It's almost my bedtime." Little Red Riding Hood looked at her watch, and he saw she had been gone almost an hour. Her mother would surely be worried if she didn't call soon. The wolf kindly offered to show her a short cut through the woods. She wasn't supposed to stray from the path, but the wolf seemed friendly enough, and this was a special situation after all. So the wolf led Little Red Riding Hood to a much smaller trail and told her to follow it straight to her grandmother's. She thanked him for his kindness and waved goodbye, but the wolf hadn't shown her a shortcut at all. In fact, the new path would take Little Red Riding Hood twice as long as the one she had been on. You see, when the wolf understood that she was going to visit her grandmother, he decided that a grown-up would make a much better meal than a tiny girl. He tricked Little Red Riding Hood so that he could sneak ahead and eat her grandmother before she got there. In a flash, the wolf arrived at the old woman's cabin and knocked on the door. When she called out, "Who's there?" from her bed, the wicked wolf answered in his sweetest voice, "It's just me, Grandma, Little Red Riding Hood." "Well, come upstairs, my dear," replied her grandmother. So the big bad wolf went up to the old lady's room. Before she knew it, he had leaped forward and swallowed her up in one huge bite. But the wolf was still hungry, so he decided to wait for Little Red Riding Hood and eat her for dessert. He put on the grandmother's nightgown and sleeping cap, drew the curtains, and crawled up into the old lady's bed. A few moments later, Little Red Riding Hood arrived. Finding her grandmother's front door wide open, she went in and walked right upstairs. "Granny," she said, "it's me, Little Red Riding Hood. I've brought you some soup and berries to make you feel better." "Come closer so I can see you, child," called the wolf in his kindest voice. "You know how poor my vision is." So Little Red Riding Hood took a step forward. "Granny, what big eyes you have," remarked Little Red Riding Hood. "The better to see you with, dear. Now come closer," replied the sneaky wolf. As Little Red Riding Hood took another step, she said, "Granny, what big ears you have." "The better to hear you with," explained the wolf. "And what a big nose you have, Granny," she observed. "The better to smell you with. Come Just a bit closer, dear, the wolf beckoned. Little Red Riding Hood took a couple more steps until she was standing right next to the bed. "Oh, Granny, what a big mouth you have!" she exclaimed. "Yes," growled the wolf, "the better to eat you with." And he grabbed Little Red Riding Hood before she could run away and swallowed her whole in one great bite. A hunter in the woods heard Little Red Riding Hood scream in fright and followed the sound of her voice to the old lady's cabin. He ran upstairs and discovered the wolf licking his lips in satisfaction. The hunter took aim at the wolf and shot him once, killing him instantly. Without a moment's hesitation, he then sliced open the wolf's belly and pulled Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother out. Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother, who were both still alive. Little Red Riding Hood threw her arms around the hunter's neck and thanked him for saving their lives. After Little Red Riding Hood had called her mother to tell her that she was safe, she and her grandmother invited the hunter to stay for dinner and joined them for a bowl of soup and some berries with cream. Little Red Riding Hood learned a very important lesson that day about listening to her mother, and you can be very sure that she never left the path or talked with a stranger ever again, especially big bad wolves. The end. Thanks for joining me today on Little Red Riding Hood and Fairy Tales. Next we'll be reading The Tortoise and the Hare. Thanks for joining, guys.